Matthew Griggs wasn't expecting anything that morning. Certainly not a letter. The world had stopped sending him things months ago, unless you counted eviction threats or the stiff white paper of final notices. But there it was, a heavy envelope tucked among the pizza flyers and discount oil change coupons. It stood out, the kind of envelope that had weight, texture, old paper, like the kind you'd find pressed into the bottom of a drawer nobody opened anymore. The handwriting on the front was slanted, like someone writing while walking or while shaking. It simply said, Matthew Griggs, personal. There was no stamp, no return address, just a red wax seal on the back, imprinted with a symbol he didn't recognize. Something that looked like a crow's foot tangled in thorns. He almost didn't open it. He was tired, hungover, and frankly a little afraid of anything that looked that deliberate. But something in his hands knew better. Inside was a single sheet of parchment. Matthew, he's dead. It's yours now. Come before the harvest. Ruth, that was it. No explanation. No love or regards. No mention of who he was, though Matthew didn't have to guess. He hadn't seen his grandfather in 21 years. The man had been a ghost long before death caught up to him. A figure from distant memories. Tall, stooped, smelling like smoke and earth. He lived in Vermont, far up north, in a place no one visited and everyone forgot. Matthew's mother called it a place that feeds on blood and silence. She said that once, half drunk, then never spoke of it again. Hollow Farm. That name hadn't crossed Matthew's mind since childhood. Crept back now, dragging with it a weight he didn't understand. He refolded the letter. On the back was a map, hand-drawn, old. The lines were careful, precise, as if someone had traced them from memory rather than satellite. At the bottom, in Ruth's thin script, were 6 final words. Do not come after first frost. Matthew stared at the letter long after the words had stopped meaning anything. By nightfall, he had packed a bag and fueled the car. By morning, he was driving north. By the time Matthew crossed into Vermont, the trees had swallowed the sky. They leaned in close to the 2-lane road, branches like fingers reaching down, thick with leaves that were just starting to rot at the edges. The last gas station had been 40 miles back, and his cell phone had given up its signal somewhere around the 3rd rusting barn. He hadn't seen another car in an hour. The map Ruth left sat folded on the passenger seat, heavy as a whisper. It was more hand-painted than drawn, the roads marked not by names but by symbols. A broken wheel, a black sun, a crow with 3 wings. Matthew followed the directions carefully. Take the left fork past the white tree. Ignore the paved road and keep to the dirt. Cross the stone bridge even if the water runs high. Every turn felt like it pulled him not just deeper into the woods, but further out of the world he knew. There were no houses out here, no fences, just fields gone wild and tall stands of pine. But the strangest part was the crows. They were everywhere, lining fence posts and telephone wires, sitting in trees in 3s and 4s, watching, always watching. One sat in the middle of the road at one point, just sat there, big as a hawk, staring at him. He honked. It didn't move. Only when he slowed to a crawl did it spread its wings and lift, slowly, heavily, as if it were made of something more than feathers. At last, as the sun began to sink behind the hills, Matthew came to the gate. It was iron, bent slightly in the middle, and chained shut with a lock the size of a child's skull. There was no sign, but he didn't need one. He was here. Hollow Farm. He climbed out of the car, gravel crunching beneath his boots. The air smelled like moss and smoke and something else. Something faint and foul like old eggs or turned soil. The lock opened on the first try. He hadn't brought a key. He hadn't needed one. As he stepped past the gate and onto the long path beyond, The wind picked up behind him. Leaves whispered against the trees, and all at once the crows began to scream. The path to the house was longer than it should have been. What looked like a quarter-mile on the map stretched on as twilight set in, the trees pressing close on either side like they were holding their breath. The gravel crunched beneath Matthew's boots, but there were no other sounds. Not even insects, just the occasional creak of a tree or the faint rustle of feathers behind him. The farmhouse stood at the edge of the field like something drawn in from an older world. Its frame was tall and skeletal, 3 stories of rotted wood, sagging porch beams, and shutters that looked like half-closed eyes. A windmill turned lazily in the distance. Or maybe it didn't. For a second, Matthew wasn't sure if he was looking at a windmill or something else. Some tall, thin shape silhouetted against the deepening sky. He blinked. It was gone. The porch groaned beneath his weight. The boards flexed like they hadn't been stepped on in years, maybe decades. A rocking chair swayed gently in the breeze, though there was no wind now. The front door opened before he touched it. Just a little. Enough to say, "We've been waiting." He stepped inside. The air hit him like a blanket soaked in old water. Heavy with mildew, faint rot, and something deeper, like wet stone or the underside of a grave. Inside, the house was still. Not just quiet. Still. Like a church at midnight. Like a photograph. White sheets draped the furniture. He passed a sofa, a long dining table, a glass cabinet full of yellowing dishes. His footsteps echoed unnaturally loud on the warped wooden floor. There was no dust. That's what struck him first. Everything looked untouched, but nothing was dusty. It was as if the house had been waiting, not abandoned, not empty, just paused. A large painting hung in the foyer above the fireplace. The frame was ornate, cracked with age. The portrait was of a man in a brown wool coat, standing in front of the same house, but it was the eyes that caught him. They were pale, too pale, almost white. His grandfather, but something in the face, something beneath the familiar bone and brow, felt off, like the painter had seen something that wasn't human and done their best to capture it. The eyes followed him as he climbed the stairs. Second floor. The hallway was narrow, doors on either side. He passed one that had been nailed shut from the outside, for long iron nails driven deep into the frame. A chill spidered up his spine. The last door at the end of the hall was ajar. Inside, a bedroom. Sparse. Simple. A bed. A dresser. A glass of water on the nightstand, still half full. The pillow looked freshly fluffed, as if someone had just risen. Matthew stepped inside. On the dresser was a worn, leather-bound journal. The cover bore only a single word, carved deep into the hide. Watch. He opened it. The first page was blank. The second, too. On the third page, someone had scrawled, in a hand that jittered like a dying radio signal, "The crows are not birds." Matthew heard something overhead. A single heavy thump. From the attic. The attic stairs groaned beneath his weight. Each step sounded like it hadn't been touched in half a century. Dry wood crying out after years of silence. A cloud of dust greeted him as he pushed the trapdoor open, and for a moment, he had to cover his mouth to avoid inhaling it. The air up there was warm, stale, and wrong. It wasn't just the smell of old cloth and insulation. It smelled like stone and rust, like something buried. The attic itself was massive. Long, slanted ceilings, thick wooden beams, and windows on either end that had long since clouded over. Shapes loomed under tarps. Forgotten furniture, old trunks, and what might have been a birdcage large enough to trap a man. In the middle of the attic stood a tall, ornate mirror. It didn't belong there. The frame was carved wood, blackened with age. The shapes etched into it weren't floral or decorative, they were watching things. Dozens of small birds with hollow eyes and gaping beaks, wrapped in vines and thorns. The mirror was covered by a heavy, dusty cloth. Matthew approached, not entirely meaning to. The cloth was damp. It clung to the glass beneath, almost reluctant to be removed. His fingers hesitated on the edge. He pulled it down. At first, all he saw was himself. Tired, pale, slightly out of breath. His reflection looked heavier than he felt, as if something unseen had taken up space inside his bones. Then something in the background of the reflection moved. Not behind him, behind his reflection. A shape, tall, black, leaning too far forward like its head was too heavy for its spine. Its arms hung low, longer than they should have been, and its face was smeared, like wet charcoal dragged across a mirror. Matthew spun around. Nothing, just the attic. Still, silent. He looked back at the mirror, only himself again, but he was standing in a different pose than he remembered, as if the reflection had delayed for just a second too long, as if it had been choosing which version of him to return. Then, faintly, he noticed something behind the glass. Faint scratches, barely visible unless the light hit them just right. They formed a circle, no, a spiral, burned into the inner side of the mirror. A crow's foot was etched in the center. Matthew stepped back. A whisper stirred in the attic air. Not a voice, not words, but a feeling, a warning. Don't look too long. Matthew didn't sleep that night. He sat in the old bedroom with the leather-bound journal in his lap and a single candle burning on the nightstand. The electric lights still didn't work. He wasn't sure they ever had. And even if they did, something told him the bulb would only hum, flicker, and die. The journal smelled like dried leaves and something faintly metallic. He turned the pages carefully. The first few were blank or soaked through with some kind of water damage. The ink had bled, the words warped and bleeding like bruises. Then came the entries. Not dates, not orderly reflections, just bursts of thought, scribbled at the margins, scratched sideways into the page, sometimes repeated over and over in growing, frantic lines. The crows are not birds. They remember. The mirror shows the truth last. The writing grew shakier the further in he went. On one page, there was a drawing, childish and crude, of a tree with crows hanging from its branches like fruit. The tree's roots were twisted into shapes that looked almost human. Underneath, his grandfather had written, "She dreams in the roots." Matthew kept reading. The west field is hollow beneath. They move through the tunnels. Not rats, not moles, something older. I heard them singing when I turned the soil. It started after Ruth left. The land went quiet for 3 years. Then the windmill stopped. That's when I knew she had returned. The root mother wears no face, only wings. She is patient. She is under the house now, watching through the boards. Do not go into the cellar. Do not feed the crows. Do not dig. The words rattled in his head. Matthew rubbed his face. The candle's flame jumped suddenly, flaring high, almost touching the ceiling, then shrank to a whimper. The room went cold. Something creaked behind the dresser. He stood quickly, heart hammering, but there was nothing there. Just the slow, soft sound of a breeze moving through the house, even though none of the windows were open. Back in the journal, one page had been marked with a piece of string. He opened it. One sentence, written in larger, tighter script. She will call him through the soil. Below it was a name. Matthew. Not him. Not boy. Not the next. Matthew. He dropped the journal. It hit the floor with a sound too heavy for its size. In the attic above him, something thudded once, twice, and then began to drag. He didn't plan on going outside. Not at night. Not after what he'd read. Not after the way the attic groaned above him like something pacing in circles, waiting for him to move. But around 2:37 a.m., the house grew too loud in its silence. There was no noise, not exactly, just pressure, a weight behind the walls, like breath, like a pulse. And then the scratching began, from the floorboards, not mice, not rats, something slower, fingernails on wood. Matthew grabbed the flashlight from his duffel bag and stepped out onto the porch. The night air was wet, almost syrupy. The moon floated above the trees like a swollen eye, half-lidded and watching. The fields rustled. He hadn't heard them move before. Earlier that day, the tall wheat-like stalks had stood frozen in the windless air. But now they danced slightly, swaying to some rhythm only they could hear. And the crows were gone. No cries, no watching eyes on the fences, just absence. That somehow was worse. He crossed the yard and walked through the gate toward the west field. The journal had said not to go there. That's where she sleeps. But something was calling. Not a sound, a pull. In his gut, in his blood. The path narrowed as the field grew thicker. The stalks weren't wheat. Not quite. They were dark, thin, too smooth, and too tall. Some of them towered 12 feet, their tips curling like fingers reaching for the sky. They brushed against his coat, against his arms. And something about the way they moved was wrong. They didn't just sway. They leaned toward him. The deeper he went, the more the ground changed. Soft at first, then spongy, and then wet. His boots squelched in something that sucked and released, like breathing mud. The stalks thinned slightly near the center of the field, revealing a clearing of black earth. And in the center of it, a circle of stones, old, covered in moss and strange runes. The dirt in the center had caved inward slightly, as if something had once burrowed up or down. Matthew stepped into the ring. The flashlight flickered, once, twice, then died. Moonlight was the only light left, and even that seemed hesitant to touch the stones. From beneath the soil, something sighed. He froze, a low, guttural exhale, like air escaping a cavern that had been sealed too long. It smelled of rot and ash. His fingers twitched. His legs wouldn't move. And then, rising faintly from the earth itself, came the whisper, "Welcome back, Matthew." Matthew woke up on the floor, not in the field, not among the stones. On the floor of the bedroom in the farmhouse, face down on the wooden boards. His mouth was dry, and his shirt clung to his back with cold sweat. His boots were caked with black earth, and his fingers trembled as he pushed himself upright. No memory of walking back, just the whisper, the circle, the pressure in his chest. He looked at the clock on the dresser. 7:13 a.m. The candle had long since burned out, leaving only a smear of wax on the table. The journal lay closed beside it. Only, it hadn't been on the table when he left. He dropped it. He remembered that clearly, the weight of it hitting the floor. Matthew stared at the cover. Now there was something new carved into the leather beneath the word, "Watch." A spiral, small, deep, still damp around the edges, as if the mark had only just been made. He didn't touch it. The air in the bedroom felt different, charged, like static electricity before a storm. He rose slowly and stepped out into the hallway. The door across from his had once been nailed shut, for long iron nails hammered into the frame. Now it was open, not wide, just a crack, a finger's width of darkness, deep and dry and waiting. He didn't look inside, not yet. Instead, he went downstairs. The house was rearranged, not major things, not furniture, details. The portrait above the fireplace had changed. His grandfather was still standing there, but his expression had shifted. Slightly, the corners of his mouth were curled up, just barely, like he knew a secret, like he had finally passed something on. There was a new door under the staircase. He swore it hadn't been there before. It was smaller than the others, barely tall enough for a child, painted the same yellowed white as the walls. But its doorknob was old, brass, and warm to the touch. Something shifted behind it. He stepped back. The door stayed shut. Matthew turned into the kitchen and froze. On the table sat a bowl, wooden, full of seed, black, glossy seed that shimmered like beetle shells. A note lay beside it, in handwriting he recognized from the journal. "Feed them, or they'll feed themselves." As he stood there, the sound returned. The scratching, not from under the floorboards this time, from inside the walls, and from above the attic, and from behind the small door. All of it at once. Scratching, digging, waiting.